Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is SmartHER News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our SmartHER series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Hi, everybody. It is the second day of March, 2022, and the world is just changing so fast. I think it's appropriate to timestamp when I'm actually recording this for you, because we could see a flurry of headlines that could take our stories, the many stories that we're watching, in a lot of different directions. I wanted to jump on real quick before this interview to talk to you a little bit about how it came about. In fact, it was one of you that reached out to me and said, hey, I think you should speak to this lawmaker in Ukraine. And you sent a picture of Inna Sovsun sitting with her laptop on a wood floor next to a gun. And I looked at that picture and I thought, I'm going to need to know a little bit more about that. And as I dug into a little bit more about Inna, I found out that not only is she a parliamentarian in the Ukrainian government, she's also a professor. She's also a mother. And you make the best producers, hands down. And your suggestions really mean a lot to me. I actually reached out to Inna directly and was able to connect with her. And that's how we were able to pull this interview together. It's really a tribute to you and to this community of SmartHER News. So I just want to reiterate how grateful I am for your support and how much you mean to actually building a solution in news. This is a very interesting situation covering this story, this war in Ukraine, without having a lot of experience on the ground at all, or really having a complete understanding of the way that the Ukrainian government works. And I want to be really honest with you about that, because I haven't dug deep into the way that this new Ukrainian government is working and the different roles in the different parties and how it's all coming together. And listen, just think of yourself parachuting, if you were an alien, parachuting into Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and you're able to speak to one lawmaker about a major conflict that's happening in America, who you just run across or who you're able to pick is going to have a very different view than others. It's going to be different talking to, let's say, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Ted Cruz. You're going to get a very different perspective. So as I was preparing for this interview with Inna, I was trying to look through a little bit more of her political background to really understand her stance on what she thinks about the future of Ukraine. And as I was preparing all of that, I realized I just need to step back and do something different, which is this. This is a breaking news environment. We want to know, what is the experience of the Ukrainians? What is it actually like for them on the ground? We feel like we know because we're seeing a lot on social media, but to hear it directly from someone there now in the capital city of Kyiv is really valuable. And I'm so grateful for Inna and her time and her generosity, because this is, you'll hear her say in her interview that this is her mission. This is something she feels she can contribute, which is talking to press all around the world to give an idea of what's actually happening inside the country. So we didn't get into what I typically would like to do, which is to dig a little deeper about, well, what is the future of Ukraine? Is it a democratic state? What about corruption there? To really kind of unpack, if we can, well, why isn't Ukraine part of NATO? And kind of some of these questions that you have really brought up that are really important. I really stayed on the personal side. And I hope that this is the beginning of a relationship with Inna, where we can continue to follow her and her family through this experience, because she's really on the forefront of building a new Ukraine. And that's what you will hear her talk about. That is her goal. And that's why she says Vladimir Putin is targeting them. So without further ado, I want you to hear from Inna directly, a parliamentarian, a professor, and a mother. Inna, it is just after 8:30 in the morning here in Texas, where I'm talking to you. I'm not out on the street, but I could tell you what's happening out there. There's a lot of traffic. People are getting their coffee. They're dropping their kids off at school. They're trying to get to work. That's what's happening here. It's just after 4:30 in the afternoon in Ukraine, where you are. What's happening there?
Well, the streets are pretty empty. We are about to go into curfew. So the curfew starts in actually half an hour. So people will have to stay at home or in shelters, as they were. and the streets are extremely empty. That is actually a bit scary, because Kiev is such a busy city. It's actually just torn with it's actually amazing. There is information that Kiev is the third city in terms of traffic all over the world, so it's extremely busy city, but right now it's just empty. You can travel around the city very fast. I did that yesterday. I was driving around, and it's just very empty. People would just go out to buy some food in the supermarkets and then go back home. So just basically very basic infrastructure is functioning, and there are lots of checkpoints all over the city, where people just build those they put the cement blocks or anything else on the roads in the city, and they are checking every time you go through the checkpoint, you have to show your ID, and they ask you some things like where you're going, what are you doing. So that's what it is.
So you are a parliamentarian, you're a government official. That's one of your many jobs. You're also a professor. You're also a mother of a 9-year-old. Just tell us a little bit about your backstory. I want to hear about everything that you're seeing and what this last week is specifically has been like for you. But just tell us a little bit about how you got to the position that you're in right now. How did you get involved in government?
So I am teaching in the university since 2010 or 11. I really have to remember that, but over 10 years now. But back in 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity, I was again teaching in the university and then also running a think tank dedicated to education policy. So after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, I was invited to join the government as the first Deputy Minister of Education and Science of Ukraine. I did serve in that position for 2.5 years. It was a very difficult period in Ukraine's life, or at least we thought so at the time, because Russia did attack Ukraine and started the war in Donbass and annexed Crimea. So that was the exact period when I was serving in the government at the time. Then I did leave the government and I went back to the university. I was teaching in the university. I did go to the United States. I was a Fulbright scholar at UC Berkeley. So anyone from Berkeley, saying hello. Then I got back, and actually a week after I got back from the US, actually even 3 days after that, the newly elected President Zelensky dissolved the parliament and called for new elections. And given my background in the Ministry of Education, I was offered a position in the party list of a liberal pro-European party of Golos. We are the smallest party in the parliament, but we are there, and we do have a constituency to represent. We are an amazing bunch of people who, I think half of our MPs in the party have been educated abroad one time or another. And yeah, we're now currently in the parliament. We are an opposition party, so we are not part of the government in the sense that we are the majority party. But at this point, it doesn't really matter, because I think the whole parliament is just staying united against this invasion.
I saw recently you put that on social media that you support your president, that in previous times maybe you differed with him on a variety of different topics, but at this
Oh, yes.
moment you're united. I want people to realize your background, because you're part of this new leadership of what we maybe can call, and you can tell me what's the right way to discuss it, of a new Ukraine, of the next chapter of Ukraine coming after what happened in 2014. So you're really on the forefront of that. And now you're here where Russia is attacking the country. And I have so many questions for you on that, but what have the last several days been like for you?
I think it still feels surreal, like trying to grasp this new reality. So many things have changed for myself. The moment I heard the first bombs exploding over the city, which was 4:30 in the morning. So I heard the bombs. I went to check the news. I saw that Putin announced the war against Ukraine. The first thing I did, I called my ex-husband, because we did have an arrangement with him that in case some war starts or something like that starts, he will take care of our son. So he did take our son to the west of Ukraine, to the relatives over there. We knew that I wouldn't be able to leave because I'm a member of parliament, so I cannot leave, even though typically women would take their kids back to the west, but I knew I would have to stay here in Kiev. So the first thing you're thinking, like, oh my God, I need to take care of my son. So my ex-husband did that. Then the second thought was, okay, I have to double check what myself as an MP have to do. So there was an emergency session of parliament that I had to get to. And then like just And then after the emergency session, when we were declaring the state of war in Ukraine, which was obvious at that time, there were some other things to take care of. Like we were provided with guns, with assault rifles, which is again extremely unusual for myself. Like if a week ago someone told me I would be supporting the president and I will have a gun, I would not believe that. Trust me, this is so much not part of my character, but it is the reality as it is right now. So what after that, we were just trying to figure out some of the logistics, who is doing what, and so on. And then by the time I was free to go home, I realized that I live north of the city, and I've heard the news that the Russians might be invading from the north. So I realized it's probably not the best idea to go back to my place. And some friends suggested I stay with them here in the city, but they have a private house. So in case we hear the alerts, we don't have to go like 10, 15 floors down. We can just go down the basement. So I've been staying with my friends. I haven't been home. I haven't seen my son for a week now. My boyfriend rejoined the army, which I expected would have happened because he's been in the army before. My dad joined the territorial defense units, which are patrolling the streets. And I'm doing basically this for the whole day. I'm doing the interviews because I do believe that in this situation, probably the most useful thing I can be doing for my people is just explaining to the world what is happening here in Ukraine.
We appreciate it very much. I think there is so much power in one story, and that's why we're honored to have you. A couple questions for you on this. What has it been like to go into the basement? Have you been going into the basement of this other house regularly? What is that like?
So you get a typically you would get a message on your Telegram channel where they say like alert, air alert, air alert. So just put your clothes on, your jacket, and you just go down the basement. Again, in my case, since I'm staying in this, it's a private house, so it's just downstairs. So it's like I don't have to run too far, and also it's not overcrowded. But it's been actually so much worse for so many other people because for many people, I think I've heard the number today that over 20,000 people in Kiev alone have actually been staying in the metro stations. So they have basically just put the mattresses on and they're staying there with their kids. For those who couldn't leave the city, so they're staying there with their kids, and some people are in bomb bunkers, specifically designated ones. Some people are in the shelters. Some people have been living in the cars in the underground parkings. So that is how it is, and so I actually do consider myself lucky because I was invited to stay with the friends over here. Otherwise, I would have been spending the nights in overcrowded bunker spaces, because we do hear those alerts pretty often. They do turn them off, but it's still happening.
How scary is that? How scary, just in general, how scary is it?
So again, I remember the first explosions I heard, and your heart starts bumping so much right now, right away. But then you're just like, okay, it didn't hit here. So what I need to do is go back to my work. So I think the first feeling of this being extremely scared has changed right now. And what I'm seeing like all over Ukraine, all of my friends and my former students and everything else is that everyone is just so determined to do something useful. So people are trying to find ways to be useful. Like I'm at this place that I'm staying, it's actually a very weird situation because some of my former students are staying here as well. Because some weird connections. It doesn't really matter, but some of my former students whom I was teaching, I think it was 3-4 years ago, great students. They were studying law. They were very well motivated and so on. Now we ended up living in the same house, but what they are doing, and I'm just hearing that like because they're sitting like in the next room over there, is they're coordinating humanitarian aid from Europe, and I asked them like, why? How did you get into that? And they said like, well, we had a friend who had a father who was serving in the embassy, so he suggested that we should start doing something. And now they have this whole scale operation. And I'm just hearing the names of the country just on the back of over there, like, oh, we have this in Italy. Hey, who is our contact person in Poland? Hey, who is our truck driver in London who is delivering something? And this just happened in a week. So those two guys, the girl, a girl and a boy, they were lawyers working as lawyers, like young lawyers and junior positions, but now they're coordinating this massive operation. And this is basically what is happening all over the country. People are just finding ways of being useful, whichever connection, whichever you can contribute, you're just doing that.
Where is your gun now? Is it by you? Do you always have it?
I think it's somewhere downstairs.
And
I'm asking
do
my
you,
brother to take control of that.
yeah. Do you feel like you know how to use it? Do you feel, have you mentally prepared yourself for potentially having to use it?
So the funny thing is that my boyfriend has always been saying, like, I need to teach you how to shoot, and I was always like, no, I don't really like guns. I would never have to use that, and so on. So I never learned how to use that, but we were given like very basic instruction, like you do this and you do that. I don't know what does it mean to be mentally prepared to shoot a person. I've never done that in my life. Again, I'm a university professor, so you can imagine. But right now, I was thinking that if there is someone who just show up at our door, we will have no other way, because because we are on our land, and this is like they have no right to be here. So we will have to protect ourselves because they are a danger to us. So yes, we will have to use the gun. Probably that I hope that, well, that would not be me because probably I'm not the best at aiming, but there are several people with this group that I'm staying in right now who do have experience with the gun, so who would be able to use that.
Your conversation sounds a lot with your boyfriend sounds a lot like my conversations with my husband, who also is former military. And and I didn't grow up around weapons. It's not something that I think about as using a gun. He's
Yeah.
like, you need to know how to use it. And so it's interesting how many, how many miles separate us. And that's a very similar experience in that particular way. And I'm sure I could never imagine being in the situation that you're in right now. And now this is the reality for you. What is this like as a mother?
That's the most difficult part because it was always like I've been given so many interviews, and I was explaining that because people were asking like, "Are you scared?" And I said like, "No, I haven't cried once, apart from one case when I saw the lines in the military recruitment offices in Kiev and many other cities. There were lines of people who were signing up to volunteer to defend our country. That was the only time I actually cried, until yesterday." Because yesterday I got a phone call from my son, and I haven't seen him for, well, 6 days as of yesterday. And I knew I was too busy just calling him, so we were just texting to each other. But what he just wanted to talk to me, and I knew I could have called him before, but I knew that would just make me cry and feel sad. So I just tried to stay organized, to stay put, and so I just texted him. But yesterday he called and he said like, "Hey, how are you?" And we just chatted, and he said like, "When shall we see each other?" And I didn't know how to answer that question. So that did break me down for a couple of minutes. That did make me cry, because the very idea of thinking like, I don't know when I will be able to see my son again, or ever for that matter. And that is just, yeah, that is difficult. It is extremely difficult. I know I'm doing that for him. I'm doing that for him to be able to live in this country and to help build it. But it is still very heavy. And then, of course, being a university professor, I do make sure that he does his math. That is a separate issue. So that's what I'm doing. Like I'm texting my ex-husband, like, did he do his math? Like, is he okay? And then Martin, that's the name of my son, he said like, yeah, I did my math. Just let me play. But I am extremely happy that he is not experiencing those explosions in the air. He will not have this fear like thousands, hundreds of thousands of other Ukrainian kids will. I just read this report, a short report yesterday about those kids living in the shelters, in the bunkers. And the report was named after a quote from a 6-year-old girl who asked her mom, "Mom, how many minutes is it till the end of the war?" And that is just heartbreaking to hear. And I was thinking like, oh my God, thanks God, I don't have to talk like that to my son. He's not like living in the basement or in the shelter in the underground station. But I do believe that this is going to be so it is such a traumatic experience for so many kids. And then, of course, in addition to that, to make things even worse, we do have 16 confirmed casualties among children as of yesterday. The numbers are yet upcoming. I'm afraid the numbers would be bigger. And then just before we started this conversation, I got a message from my assistant, and he texted me and say, have you seen the story in Kharkiv, where a woman gave birth to the twins, and they yesterday and today, both the woman and her husband, the father of the kids, were killed in the bombardments in Kharkiv. So those two twins are left orphans just one day after they were born. So that is something that I can't even comprehend. And that is why I am trying to stay put, because I realize I might be uncomfortable. I'm missing my son so much. But I just can't imagine the like what those parents of the killed children are feeling, what the lives of those two orphans will be. That is just terrifying.
How do you explain this to your child? That's a question that so many American families are asking themselves. How do they explain the situation in Ukraine and the news to their children? How do you do it to yours?
So, well, he knew we are at war with Russia, so he did know about that, because we are at war for 8 years now. We probably were not going into that many details, but he did know that Russia did attack Ukraine 8 years ago. And right now, we are just telling him that the war is here, but we try not to give him too many details, because we really don't want him to be scared for my life, given that I am staying in Kiev here. So again, I think it is a bit easier for myself, because he is not in this territory which is being bombarded. So he's not experiencing those bombs right away. He's just, he's a bit better. But other parents, I've heard the experience, they are trying to explain to the kids that there is this bad guy who decided that he doesn't want us to exist and we have to fight back. And I think in those narratives we are using to tell to our kids, we are putting great emphasis on how we are trying to protect them, because that is what kids need. They do need our protection. So, well, again, not my own experience, because my experience is slightly easier probably in that sense. But I think parents who are trying to explain are explaining what the Ukrainian army is doing to defend them, and how their parents are willing to, they will do everything possible to protect their kids.
What are we not seeing? We're seeing so much just through social media, or through we do have major television networks that are on the ground in Ukraine, but we're not Ukrainian. And we didn't drive around the streets like you did yesterday. We're hearing all sorts of reports about what's happening and what's not. What do you think outsiders are not seeing that we should know about?
I'm not sure to what extent that is not seen, but there are two major things that I would like everyone to know. First of all, is that Putin did attack Ukraine, claiming that he's coming to liberate us from the Nazi regime, which is, well, nonsense. Look at me, do I look like a Nazi? But also he was claiming that he's coming here to liberate the Russian-speaking people here in Ukraine. But I'm from Kharkiv. I'm a Ukrainian speaker, but most of my friends in Kharkiv are Russian speakers. And they are sending me messages, my former classmates with whom I haven't been in touch for like 20 years since I graduated. But they're all sending me messages saying like, please just don't leave us here. Please protect Kharkiv. Please make sure that we kick them out of our country. And they're sending me messages in Russian, but they are asking for any help possible. They are praying for the Ukrainian army. And actually the Ukrainian army over there is doing a pretty good job, despite the heaviest bombardments of Kharkiv, which pains me to see, again, my native city, bombs falling like 5 minutes away from my school. But people over there are so resilient, and they're sending me messages like, we shall stay strong, just don't give up, and we shall not surrender. And those are mainly Russian-speaking people. So this is important to understand, is that Putin is not liberating anyone here. Putin is just attacking civilian population for a simple reason, that he doesn't like Ukraine to exist. His claims that he doesn't like Ukraine joining NATO or wanted to join NATO are also false, because let me remind everyone else, everyone listening to this, that he did attack Ukraine in 2014, when we were officially a non-allied state. We didn't announce that we want to join NATO. We were officially non-allied state, and that was part of our constitution. So it's actually vice versa. We say now that we want to join NATO precisely because Putin did attack us, not the vice versa. Because his narrative is just completely false. He's saying like, we want to join NATO, and that is why he attacked us. But it's actually completely different. So that is the first thing that I want everyone listening to this to understand. And the second thing I want everyone to know is this. Ukrainians are extremely resilient, and they are fighting so much. There are so many stories of just regular folks who are fighting back. And I'm just looking at those people and thinking like, oh my God, where did they get that courage? I'm seeing pictures of people attacking Russian tanks with their bare hands. I'm seeing, there was this video, I think the third day of war, with a guy who was just driving on the road in the countryside. And then there were 3 Russian tanks who apparently got lost because the first couple of days of war, what the Ukrainians did, because they realized that the Russians do not have any electronic devices. So don't ask me that. That's about the preparation of the Russian army, but people in the tanks, they don't know exactly the directions where they need to go to. So they had to find ways based on the road signs. So what the Ukrainians did, they took down the road signs. So the Russians driving in tanks, they would just get lost. And then they would start asking for directions, and people would just yell at them. So there was this one guy who did see 3 Russian tanks. So why, like in the middle of nowhere, there were no Russian tanks anywhere else, just 3 tanks, like in the middle of nowhere. And he left his car. He started a videotaping on his phone, and he came up to them and said like, "Hey, say something in Ukrainian." And they couldn't say something. So he said like, "Why are you here?" And they said like, "Oh, get out of here. Just don't film us. Just, we shall not be shooting you. Just don't film us." And he started quoting the Ukrainian constitution, saying that according to the constitution of Ukraine, I am allowed to do this. So I'm going to continue doing that. We want you out of our country. And he was standing like in front of 3 tanks with several heavily armed soldiers. And he was just doing that. That is just the example of courage that I couldn't imagine I would be seeing. And then there were also, of course, other stories. Like
can you tell us a story about your father? I think that's an important
my
story
dad,
to know.
Oh, that is like, I said again, I still can't believe that is happening. So my dad, the first day of war, he did take my mom to the west of Ukraine, to the family. And I was thinking that he will stay there. And I was like, okay, so my son is safe, my parents are safe. My boyfriend is with the military. I expected that to happen. Don't like it, but it is part of, of life. And then my mom called me at 6 a.m. and she said like, Ina, dad is coming back to Kiev. I said like, what the hell? Like why should I, why? And she said like, well, call him and talk to him. So I did. And I asked him like, Dad, why are you coming back? And he took a pause and he said, and I quote, "I'm coming back to defend the capital of Ukraine, the city of Kiev." And I was like, Dad, you are 61 years old. He does have military experience because he was serving in Afghanistan back in the Soviet times, but still he's 61 years old. He has trouble walking because he has sick knees. So is that okay if the lights?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Someone downstairs. So he did have he has sick knees. So I was like, Dad, what will you do? Like, you hardly walk. And he said, well, that means I will crawl, but I will be defending the city. Actually, as we speak, I haven't been in touch with him for 24 hours. His phone is off. I think in the area where he is, there is problems with connections. I am very much concerned about the fact that his phone is off, but I hope he is okay and he's just not able to talk.
Well, we hope and pray that's the case too, and it gives us an idea of the family that you're from and your roots, and that's something. I know you have to run for another interview. I just have a final question for you. I have so many questions, but just sort of one that brings us back to your role in government. We've heard a lot about talks between the sides, between Ukrainians and Russians. What can you tell us about what you know about those talks, and what do you possibly see as a way for this to end?
That is a complicated question because, frankly speaking, well, when the Russians are saying let's find the compromise, I can hardly imagine this compromise, frankly speaking, because you see, the situation is like this: they want us dead, and we want to leave. So there is very little room for compromise between being dead and alive. You are basically one or another. So that's why when the Russians were talking about having the talks, they were offering like, let the Ukrainian army surrender. But there was not a single good reason for the Ukrainian army to surrender, because we were actually winning. We still are winning, and I'm sure that we shall prevail after all. The major question is just the number of casualties we shall suffer in the process. So I would love that to have a diplomatic solution. But I believe by this time, everyone in the world just realizes that Putin is a madman. He has gone completely nuts. He's not a rational person, and you can only hold some negotiations with a person who is thinking rationally. But he is just so much driven by his hatred towards Ukraine, his hatred toward the very idea of democratic state existing right so close to Russia, that I don't think he can be rationed with. He's not thinking rationally. And that is why, well, our hope is that probably someone in his circle is thinking rationally, but we cannot be sure about that. So as of now, our trust lies with our army and hopefully with the West. We are asking the West for the toughest sanctions possible for Russia, like full trade embargo. Just don't give a single dollar to Russia, because it will use it to kill Ukrainians. We're asking for any support you can provide to the army, protective gear or anything else. We'll take it. We shall be putting that to good use to protect our own lives. And then the third thing is help us establish no-fly zone, because those airstrikes over the cities in Ukraine, they're just terrifying, and it's very difficult to fight when the enemy is killing your people from air. So with that, I believe we shall be able to prevail, and I do hope that we shall be able to avoid many more casualties.
Let me just ask you a final question on that, because the no-fly zone has been a big topic of conversation in America. The White House's position right now on that is that we can't establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine because that would draw America into combat, a combat that we're not willing to be in at this point because the conflict will only get larger. What's your response to that?
I do hear that debate. I do understand the complexities of it, but I will remind you of that. The Putin did say that he doesn't like Poland and Hungary being NATO members. He doesn't like basically the whole of Eastern Europe being part of NATO. That he does have his issues with Finland, so he can attack there. So the question is, let's imagine Ukraine is taken over by Putin. He will not be stopped there, because then he will go on and try to attack Poland. And NATO will have to get engaged anyways, because Poland is a NATO member. If he tries to attack or provoke Finland, I believe the whole Western world will stand up to protect Finland. So I think what we need to understand is that right now, just stopping him as early as possible is the best way, because otherwise he will not be stopped. We do realize he has gone completely crazy. So I believe right now getting engaged is the way to save lives, because otherwise you will have to engage to save lives in Poland and in Hungary with much more casualties.
I was looking back on some of your social media posts that day. I was going back as far as I possibly could. And it was interesting to see what you were putting on Twitter in January and in December, and your wordings that you were giving at that time. And in fact, in December, you said the Ukrainian army has been defending Europe's eastern border for 8 years. So you were already said this is the eastern border of Europe, not just the eastern border of Ukraine. And so I know that's a whole other topic of a conversation that I hope that we can have. I know you have an interview that you also have to run to, and I'm really appreciative of your time. Any final thoughts, Ina, before you go, about, what you're watching for next and what you really think the stakes are here?
I believe that the stakes here are extremely high, because right now it is a war of Russia against Ukraine officially. But I believe at this point, the whole world understands that it is actually a war for the very idea of democracy, of respect for human rights. I guess everyone who is supporting that should just get engaged in any way possible. We shall be fighting. We shall be truly defending the eastern border of Europe. But we are just asking for any help that we can get, and I'm sure we shall prevail. I'm sure we shall win. I'm so much in love with my people right now, and their level of resistance they are showing. We are just asking for all the help we can get from anyone listening to this, from anyone in the West, so that we can avoid, the disaster it can turn into.
Ina, thank you so much for your time. We'll be thinking of you and your family. I hope we can stay in touch. And I'd love to hear more for your perspective as the days and weeks go on, not just during the conflict, but what's next, because we're going to be looking forward to that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, SmartHER news, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing SmartHER.